Scientists recently reported they've discovered a rare new strain of the Human Immuno-deficiency Virus, or as we know it more commonly as HIV, for the first time in 19 years. According to Abbots Laboratories, which made the discovery, the strain is part of the Group M version of the HIV-1 that is known globally. Now, because of the virus, there are different strains and subtypes. It has the ability to change and mutate. So let's talk to Dr. Kuku Appiah, who is the Director of Medical and Science Affairs in Africa for Abbott Rapid Diagnostic. It's good to have you. Welcome.
Good morning.
So let's just clarify this, because I've done quite a bit of reading about the so-called new strain. It's not necessarily a new strain. I mean, it is existing. It just now can actually be looked into further because you could actually test it now. So talk to us about what we are actually referring to here.
So there is a process by which a strain of HIV virus would be declared officially to be existing, and that requires 3 separate samples to have been collected and characterized with those specific characteristics.
Yeah.
What we have is that in the 80s and in the 90s, 2 separate samples were collected in the DRC and were identified as being that strain.
Subtype L.
Subtype L.
Right.
But we required a third sample in order for us to officially determine that we have a new subtype. This sample was collected from the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2001, but at the time there was a low viral count, and at the time the technology did not exist for us to be able to classify or determine that this is the third sample that would meet the criteria of a new strain. The Abbott, in collaboration with researchers globally, have worked on new next-generation genome sequencing, which has allowed us to be able to determine the characteristics of the virus in that sample using very small samples of virus.
Yeah.
So what we are announcing now is that we have completed the process of determining the third sample, and so now we can declare that there is a new subtype.
Okay, so this is a great clarification. I mean, it's not something that's just popped up out of nowhere. You didn't even know it existed. It is confirmation now of what you had suspected all along. Let's talk about how common this particular strain is. Is it common, or are you finding that this is quite a rare strain of HIV?
Where we are now is that we have these 3 samples that have been characterized, and now we have declared a new strain. We will then put out our intellectual property to global health researchers, and they will then go out, look at their old archives and look at existing patients and be able to determine how widespread the strain is, and also whether there's anything that we can use to characterize people that are infected with that strain. Are they more or less virulent in terms of how they transmit HIV to other people? How have they responded to treatment? It's the characterization of a new strain also helps us in terms of the work we're doing around vaccines. So yeah. As of now, we have determined, it's a library that we have determined that this is a new strain, and we put that out there, and people will then be able to inform us how widespread that strain, because it has been circulating since at least
2001.
2001.
Yeah.
And it may not have any specific additional characteristics from what other strains of HIV type M have.
Educate us. How many strains of HIV are there, confirmed strains of HIV?
So there are many. As HIV and hepatitis virus replicate, errors occur, and bits and pieces of the virus connect and disconnect from each other. So they're constantly having the ability to develop new strains. So the strains for type M are being designated alphabetically, and so we've reached L. But there is HIV-2, there are other groups of HIV-1 as well, so there are many variations to it.
I suppose the big question is the current drugs that are available in terms of ARVs, are they effective on all of these strains? And one would imagine that this new discovery that we're talking to is not going to be immune to it. Will the medication and ARVs that are out be able to treat anybody that has got this strain?
Because we don't know how widespread the strain is, we can't really speak about how people with this strain are responding. But we would expect that because people in general are responding very well to the excellent ARVs we have out there, the assumption would be that this strain also there wouldn't be any need for people to go and retest to find out whether they have this strain, because the treatment that's out there is effectively tackling HIV.
Yeah. You know, one of the things is and you and I were chatting off air, is that we don't talk to HIV much anymore, because yes, we have got ARVs and it does certainly keep it under control and let people have normal lives. In South Africa has come leaps and bounds when it comes to the treatment of HIV and AIDS. But does South Africa still have the highest prominence and the highest rate of HIV in the world?
Yes, South Africa has the largest number of people living with HIV in the world.
Yeah.
It's true that we have excellent diagnostics, we have excellent treatment, and we're having great progress with vaccines. But right now, what the focus needs to be is for people that are HIV negative to know their status, and people who are HIV positive to be able to identify their status and also be on treatment. There are a lot of technologies that would prevent a person from transmitting HIV or from being infected with HIV right now, and I'm not sure that people are adequately tapping into the resources that are available. For example, we have PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis treatment that can be given to you if you're HIV negative but perceive yourself to be at risk. We have additional tests that are available, including the development of self-tests. So there's a lot of tools out there for people who are either HIV negative or HIV positive to tap in. But what is important is that people need to know their status. Absolutely. And they need to. People that are HIV negative need to repeatedly test themselves. So that's the message.
I mean, we sit with figures of, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just reading off of a website that is saying that the figure stands at 7.1 million people in South Africa that are living with HIV. Is that about right? As they say, 20.4% of the population.
That would be my understanding.
Okay,
is that that we have over 5 million people receiving antiretroviral treatment in South Africa. So that is a huge burden for the health system. And what we need to do is make sure that the new generations, the younger generations, are not also growing up and being infected with HIV. So we ultimately would like to see an end for AIDS in the future.
And that's the reality, is that even though we've made strides in treating people that know that they are HIV positive, the prevalence of getting HIV in South Africa is still high. So people are still contracting HIV, even though there are so many education campaigns where we tell people, have protected sex, do not share your needles, don't do this. You sort of have tried to educate people and they see the dangers, and yet it doesn't seem to be filtering down to people. They are still contracting HIV.
So researchers have identified that men specifically are less inclined to test for HIV, and they're less inclined to access health services around sexual reproductive health. So the call would be for men to also explain and inform us what it is that makes it so difficult for them to access the services that are available, but also for public health providers to be able to provide treatment and services that are accessible to men. Yeah. So that would be one of the big challenges, is how to get men, young men, older men, to test and to be on treatment or to practice preventative methodology.
And that is the thing. And I remember talking to this quite extensively with the health minister at the time. It was Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, talking to young girls that are perhaps the biggest victims for contracting HIV, is having unprotected sex with these men that you are referring to. They come through as these blessers and these men that sort of spoil these young girls, and they have unprotected sex, and then they get HIV, or they actually die from AIDS because they don't go and check. I mean, last year alone, the figure was standing at 240,000 new HIV infections here just in South Africa. I mean, does that number drop at all? Or are we finding that the number is actually increasing every year?
I'm not sure about that.
I know, I'm asking you numbers
but
and
what I
figures,
would say is that for young women, there is a lot of work that's being done around empowerment, because one of the issues that has been identified as a trigger for them to access blessers or to engage in transactional sex is the lack of basic stipend or pocket money or money to buy airtime, deodorants or toiletries. So there is a lot of work that's being done with young women around getting them to be more empowered, to have peer support, and ultimately to access a pre-exposure prophylaxis. So for a young woman or a young man that perceives themselves to be at increased risk of contracting HIV, there are solutions that are available. But overall, it also speaks to an individual's mindset and what do you deem to be your future, and how invested are you in making sure we have an HIV-free generation?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just think it's very fascinating and so much more work, and we have to still speak a lot more about HIV. At one stage, that's all we spoke about, and then suddenly it disappeared in the conversation, and we need to keep it up there. Just as we sort of close up here, we were talking about these tests that people can do, and the whole idea is to know your status. But the tests that you can do at home, or you can go to a clinic, but how do we get access to these tests that we can actually go and ensure that we know our status?
There's a whole program out there around increasing access to testing. So if you visit any health center, you will find that there are activities around self-testing, around supervised testing, and just around any type of HIV rapid testing. So that is available at any health center, and increasingly being made available outside of health centers, so at sports centers, at any social functions, shopping malls. The HIV testing is quite widespread.
It's
available in South Africa.
It is.
Yes.
I must say, I've seen it in a lot of places, and yet we just need to get more and more people to actually test. From the point of view of somebody that may suspect they are HIV positive, what are those signs you should look for? Obviously, you know, your first starting point is knowing the activities that you've been involved in, and if in fact you're not feeling well, what should you look for in your health?
Leanne, we're really not encouraging people to wait until they have symptoms before they go for testing. HIV testing, if you have an active sex life or if you are otherwise exposed, HIV testing really needs to become routine. And so we're not, for you to wait until you have symptoms is really, really way too late in the game. So everybody needs to, we live in a country where a significant proportion of people are HIV positive. So everybody needs to take make the effort to make sure that they know their status at any particular point in time, and not at the stage where you are developing symptoms, losing weight, having night sweats, coughing. All that would be way too late in the game. Yeah. There is evidence to show that the sooner you're diagnosed and the sooner you commence ARV treatment, the better your overall outcome in life would be.
Unbelievable. Well, listen, thank you for talking to us here on the program, and it certainly is a story that we need to look at and more carefully, but the whole crux of the conversation, what started it, was the talk of a new strain of HIV, which has been confirmed now that it is a new strain. It was actually first found in 2001, and now that there are more scientific developments, it can actually be confirmed that this is a new strain. Dr. Kuku Appiah, the Director of Medical and Science Affairs in Africa for Abbott Rapid Diagnostic, talking to us about that rare new strain of HIV that has been confirmed lately. All right, let's take a